Hello, hi, I'm Tobi. Welcome to this tiny little corner of the internet where I basically run my mouth about books that I love, don't like, I'm currently reading, that I would recommend. In this video, my first video, I will talk about my favourite books of 2021. And I'll link my Goodreads down below if you want to have a little gander, a little look at my reviews and the books that I read. And now I'll talk about some of my favourite books. I'll also give some honourable mentions at the end. We'll go to a dystopia. And this book, which is one of the last books I read in 2021, and so it's the last 5-star I gave, and I did not expect it to make like my top books, but this book has remained with me. That is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, who is an Argentinian writer, and this was translated from Spanish into English by, I want to say Sarah Bozis, but I will confirm. Yes, I was, Sarah Bozis. It's a dystopian novel which is scarily too similar to our world. It follows a society where all animals and animal meat have been contaminated, supposedly, with a virus, which is fatal to humans. So humans are like, well, we gotta get our protein from somewhere, and we ain't about to be vegans or veggies. So cannibalism becomes legalized. Yeah, just let that sink in. It essentially is a great social commentary on how, surprise, surprise, capitalism, consumerism have allowed people to accept and justify the atrocious acts that are being committed in this society, and how it becomes so normalized, and how just the use of language and I guess almost like marketing can be used to manipulate and almost brainwash people into thinking like, yeah, the fact that I could be eating my neighbour is calm, you know? And in the novel, we actually are following Marcus, who is a human meat supplier, and he's conflicted by this new society, and he's also dealing with his own personal losses that you find out more about throughout the book. I love that the narration style is very detached, and I get that could then make this book feel maybe a bit boring to some people because you do not feel invested or like emotionally attached to this character at all. You're literally just following his life as he goes about the slaughterhouse. But I think the detached narration style serves perfectly because it really then illuminates like the extent of the atrocities that are being committed in this book. And then the ending, oh my gosh, the ending. I wasn't ready. I don't think anyone was ready. Like people who didn't even have like the best reading experience reading this book still were like the ending. Superb. Best final line I've come across in a novel ever. In fact, let me just reread it. Not out loud, I'm not spoiling, but just for myself. Best final line I've come across in a novel ever. Yeah, definitely not for everyone. This is more, I guess, like a slow-paced book. But so there is something you are following along, as well as just vibes happening as you go about, walk around life with Marcus. But this, if you love like books which, you know, is heavy on like social commentary, and it's a talk on, you know, problematic stuff that's happening in our society, and how if we're not careful we could end up in a world like this where we're yamming on each other and saying yummy yummy, licky licky, then yeah, you will enjoy this book. But if you want a book, as I said, with loads of plot, very fast paced action, nah, this ain't gonna be for you. But lovely, unexpected 5 stars again. Okay, next I've got 2 non-fiction, which for me is actually a really pleasant surprise. I do think they're the only non-fictions I've read out of all the books I read this year, but I don't naturally gravitate towards them. But these, exquisite. If you don't usually pick up non-fiction, pick these up. So I'll start off with In the Dream House by Carmen Machado, who is a Cuban-American author. And this is a memoir that is very unmemoiry, if that makes sense. I've never read a memoir written like this. It's written almost through a fictional lens, and she uses different narrative tropes and horror themes to describe an abusive same-sex relationship that she was in with a woman. So this was definitely harrowing and hard to read at times, and definitely you want to check out the content and trigger warnings before diving into this. But I just love how she used, the dream house was used almost as an architecture for thought, and by that she refers to her ex who is discussed in this book just as the woman in the dream house, and the dream house almost becomes the way that she's able to describe the horrific things that she had to endure during this relationship. And what I loved so much about this book was that she talks on archival violence at the beginning, and how, especially when it comes to women, people of colour, queer people, and how their archives and history are just not there. Either they've been lost, or purposely or not, or they just weren't documented because certain people thought, we don't need that. And this memoir is her essentially reclaiming that. She's a queer, Cuban, Latina woman, and I just think that that's just wonderful. And the way she writes, as I said, dream house is set design, dream house is entomology, dream house is high fantasy, dream house is utopia, dream house as erotica. Like, I've never read a memoir like that, where it's through all these different narrative, and often, as I said, with a horror aspect to it, tropes. And what's also really important is that it shines a light on something that often people shy away from or feel unable to express very freely, because of course, like, the fight for equality, which is still ongoing for LGBTQIA plus rights, so difficult that people, I think, often then can feel the pressure that they have to present these like almost perfect relationships to show, like, yeah, see, it was worth it and we deserve it, which you just do in and of itself as identity. No one gets to tell someone if that identity is correct or not, like, no. But her shining a light on this, I feel like so many people who feel seen, who feel heard. Such an important book out there. Yeah, if you want to read a memoir unlike any other memoirs, this is for you. And the cover, and the cover, absolutely gorgeous, and not too long either. Okay, next. So the second non-fiction book, Feminism Interrupted, Disrupting Power by Lola Olufemi, who is a British Nigerian author. Big up Niger. And this, honestly, the blurb, I'm going to read it because it perfectly sums up what's happening in the world and also this book. Plastered over t-shirts and tote bags, the word feminist has entered the mainstream and is fast becoming a popular slogan for a generation. But feminism isn't a commodity up for purchase. It's a weapon for fighting against injustice. And this book reclaims feminism from consumerism, from the state, from laws, from capitalism, from police, from borders, and it's, you know, from the cultural gatekeepers of, well, I'll say white feminism, essentially. Lola Olufemi is a fantastic Black feminist author, and the chapters, especially on trans misogyny, gendered Islamophobia, sex workers, art for art's sake, she dives into these topics in a way I haven't ever seen before, which was wonderful. Really made me think. Really also was a good like bop on the head about, you know, feminism isn't just being like, yeah, you know, I believe in equality and I know. No, it's like, this is continual global justice work. Like, it's hard work. That is the point of it. It is hard work, and it's kind of a reminder that, yeah, back up your ideas. Anyone who says they're a feminist needs to read this book. This really should be mandatory in schools. It should be on the syllabus. This is wonderful. And this really just explains like radical feminism in the best way, and the way she weaves in the British experience and, as I said, black feminism throughout this entire novel was just very short essays. This book is not long at all, very easy to get stuck into, and as I said, it makes you really think, but it doesn't make your brain hurt either. She writes in a very accessible, interactive way. So absolute easy 5 stars. So next we're going to move on to fantasy, and for this one it is The Sword of Kaigen by N.L. Wang. Wow. This is a standalone fantasy. It's self-published and it is phenomenal. Let me give you a little sneak peek into what it's about. So it's a Japanese inspired military fantasy. You might see a little theme here when it comes to my fantasies. I tend to really enjoy these East Asian inspired military fantasy worlds. People describe it as the darkness of the Poppy War meets Avatar: The Last Airbender because of the elemental magic system that Emma Wang has created. And I think that's pretty good. I will say, I think the Poppy War is darker than Sword of Kaigen. Sword of Kaigen is still dark, don't get me wrong, but I think that's a pretty good way of summing up this book. But in terms of the actual what's going on, we're following 2 point of views, a son and a mother's, and they're part of the Matsuda family. And it's like the legendary family in this peninsula where they're some of the most powerful warriors. And so you get cool flashbacks with the mother, and her character development and growth is, in one novel, insane, amazing. And Matsuda, you get that slightly more, I guess, YA feel to it. You get to follow him at school a bit, but then also in war, and how the relationship between his mother and himself develops. And I think the relationships, the dynamics was what's so great about this novel, because it's predominantly familial ones, family ones, and also romantic ones. But I love that the way they developed, it was in a very realistic way. Like, okay, in this short period of time, you're not going to go from A to Z. You're going to go from like A to C, which in itself is wow. And then, oh my gosh, the battle scenes, breathtaking. They genuinely were cinematic. These were epic battles, and the way that Emma Wang writes them, I can literally visualize them in my mind. I'm like, oh, the ice magic, the wind magic, blood bending, like insane. I've never read battle scenes like this in a book where I literally felt like I was watching it 4K on a 70-inch TV. Yeah, wonderful. And then also the way Emma Wang writes about aftermath of war, I'd say similarly to Rebecca Kwong with the Poppy War series, she does not shy away from showing again how brutal, gruesome, just traumatic war really is, and the way it then changes people and affects people's lives forever afterwards. And it brought tears to my eyes easily. It got to me a lot. You know, a standalone fantasy is great when deep down you're like, I wish there was a sequel or a trilogy. I just want to dive more into this world and know what happens to the characters next. And it's great. So if you're especially worried about having to commit to another fantasy series, Sword of Kaigen is for you. It is exquisite. And then finally, my favorite books of 2021, I want to talk about YA novels, plural, The Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. I'm sure many people have heard of this. There's been the Netflix adaptation of the Shadow and Bone series, which is like linked to the Six of Crows duology. Haven't read them though, but let me just give you a little brief synopsis of what goes on. We'll talk about Six of Crows first. So, 6 dangerous outcasts, 1 impossible heist. Kaz's crew is the only thing that might stand between the world and destruction if they don't kill each other first. You have a convict with a thirst for revenge, a sharpshooter who can't walk away from a wager, a runaway with a privileged past, a spy known as the Wraith, a heartrender using her magic to survive the slums, and a thief with a gift for unlikely escapes. I mean, like, if you want a fun time, a good time, this is the book. It's fast-paced, it's action-packed, the character development, character growth, the relationship dynamics, the romantic relationships, but also like the friendship ones. I enjoy friendships that are written really well, especially when you see how they kind of realistically grow and evolve, and it was just a good time. And then obviously there's so much plot. It's a heist, like it's stressful. Like there's times your blood pressure will raise, your blood will boil, you want to chuck your book or your Kindle, and it was just a great wild ride. And then Crooked Kingdom, the sequel. I think my Goodreads review of this was simply, only cried 3 times, XO. And that sums it up. Yeah, Leigh Bardugo, she ripped out my heart, chucked it on the floor, jumped on it a few times and then returned it back. Very rude, but it was fantastic. And I think on Goodreads, it's the book on my like Goodreads shelf that has the highest ratings, and I understand. This book was incredible. The way the character evolution from the first book was great, and again, like very realistic, which I appreciate. Like relationships don't just develop like that. It'd be one that's quite easy to recommend if you're in a reading slump, for sure. It's so fast paced and you just want to know what's going to happen, and you become so attached to the characters. And they're just my gal. And there's decent representation. Like, there definitely could have been much better racial representation. I'm sorry, like one mixed race character, like but you do get, you know, in terms of like queerness, sexuality, and people with disabilities and people from different walks of life, and yeah, just the 6 friends together are just it's everything. And the fantasy elements that are weaved into are great. The magic system is just wonderful. And so that's my favorite books of 2021. I'll quickly do my honorable mentions. I'm just gonna show you the book, give my rating, and I'll do another video on these honorable mentions because I think there's almost as many as like my top books of 2021, because as I said, I had a great reading year and I'm not sorry for that. And a lot of these books have such a special place in my heart, so I would love to give detail about what they're about, my thoughts on them, who I think would enjoy them. So let me stop talking and get started. Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is a Nigerian author, and I gave this 4 stars. Beautiful. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, I gave this 4.5 stars. The writing, woo. Then this book, you guys will be tired of seeing this book is everywhere. Booktube, Bookstagram, Book Talk, everywhere. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, 4.5 stars. My heart, the ending, yeah, I shed a tear or two. Beautiful. And then also Circe by Madeline Miller. This one does not get as much love and I'm so sad about it. A lot more character focus, but I had so much fun reading it and living on this little deserted island of Circe. So also 4.5 stars. The House of the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, 4.5 stars. I think this is genuinely the first time a book has made me shed tears of joy. Not one where it's making me sob because my heart is aching, my heart is hurting. This was tears of joy. This was such a cozy, comforting, just lovely read. And V. Schwab, a very well-known author, I think her review is the perfect way to sum it up. I loved it. It's like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket. Simply perfect. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This I did not expect to love, and this was 4.5 stars. Honestly, would have been 5 if it wasn't for chapter 11, which was just purely description, and I was like, why are we being told this? I don't care. It doesn't add anything to the story. But it was a great look into like morality and hedonism. But yeah. Pachinko by Jin Lee. Wonderful historical fiction about Korean life in Japan after Japan colonized Korea in the 20th century, and heartbreaking, beautiful, devastating, great read. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Very unique light fantasy. I didn't even know you could have a fantasy book like this. Wonderful, First 80 pages, absolute slog, but once you get past it, it is exquisite. Then we've got J City, also 4.5 stars, another East Asian but mafia-esque urban fantasy world that Fonda Lee has conjured, 4.5 stars. Very excited to read Jade War this year. Maybe we'll get to Jade Legacy 2, the third book in the installment, but I'll let you guys know. And finally, Bunny, which was 3.5 stars interestingly, but honestly I think it needs to be pushed to 4 because this is the book that lives rent free in my head. Like, I can't stop thinking about it. It is the weirdest book, a fun descent into chaos and madness, and got me out of a reading slump perfectly. So yeah, that's the last recommendation, no, the last honourable mention. I hope you enjoyed this video. I loved just rambling on about these books that I've absolutely loved, and I'll see you in the next video, and I will be discussing my worst books of 2021. If you liked it, thumbs up. If you didn't, just leave. You don't have to give it a thumbs down, you just leave it. If you want to join, as I said, this tiny chaotic corner of the internet, subscribe. If you don't. It's not by force. I'm not putting a gun to your head. It's okay. So ciao.